Can't actually remember.
Okay. Well, I think perhaps we need to leave this one for some bit more research to be sort of done out. Okay, good morning everybody, and apologies for the delay for anybody who is watching us on YouTube. We had a slight IT blip, but hopefully we're now up and running, so we will now start the meeting properly. We paused to make sure everybody could hear. So welcome to West Edinburgh Council's Development Management and Licensing meeting for the 1st of September. I'm the chairman and my name is Julie Yelland. Just before we start, I will just go through a bit of brief housekeeping. Please could I remind all attendees that you should mute your microphones to reduce background noise and use the chat box to indicate if you wish to declare an interest or raise a question or to take part in the debate only. If members lose internet connection, then the meeting will be adjourned briefly to allow you to come back online. The meeting is being live streamed to YouTube as we speak. However, it won't be possible to adjourn the meeting in the event that members of the press or public lose internet connection. So the application this morning will follow our normal procedure. The case officer will present his report, followed by we have a pre-registered speaker who will be invited to speak for up to 3 minutes, and then the ward member also will be able to speak for up to 5 minutes. And members of the committee will be able to question each speaker on points of clarity if they so wish. Speakers will be invited into the committee, well, they have been already invited and they're already in. And as we have only one application before us, then the rest of this bit of housekeeping relating to that doesn't apply. Once we get to the stage that the recommendation is ready to be moved and seconded after questioning, this will enable debate, and then at the conclusion of the debate on the application, then I shall call for the vote. And the Democratic Services Officer will then call each councillor who is in attendance and a member of this committee to confirm that they were present for the entire item and take their vote for, against, or to abstain. Also, if any member does have a disclosable pecuniary interest, then you will need to leave the meeting for the duration of the relevant application and will be required to disconnect from the call. You will be invited back to the meeting once that application has been determined. Please could I remind members to remain focused on the application being considered and to keep questions and comments short and to the point. The minute taker will find it harder than normal to identify who is speaking and what is being said, so please speak clearly and at a reasonable pace, and when an officer does wish to speak, they will indicate using the chat facility. So I'm now going to ask Mrs. Hall to take a roll call to make sure that all can hear and be heard and to confirm the meeting is quorate. Over to you, Mrs. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cheadle.
Yes, I'm here and I can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier.
Yes, I am present and I can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Hipsey.
I'm present and I can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Present and can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes.
Present and can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Present and can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, I'm present and I can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Renders.
Yes, present and can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon.
Yes, present and can hear.
Thank you. And Councillor Yelland.
I'm present and I can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for clarification for those listening to this meeting, I can confirm the following officers are also present. Pat Weimer, Head of Planning, Oliver Gibbons, Planning Officer, David Fairburn, Borough Solicitor, Janice Young, the Gatekeeper, Phil Baker, Joint Local Plan Officer, and myself, Catherine Hall, Democratic Services Officer. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, and now to the agenda. So we have item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
We have no apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. And members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interest, including the nature and extent of such interest they may have in any items to be considered at the meeting. Does anybody wish to declare an interest?
Chairman, I would declare an personal interest. Councillor Terry Pearce, declare a personal interest in this application as a member of the Management Committee of the Devon Building Control Partnership.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Nobody else declaring any interest? Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. There aren't any at the moment. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. They could be found on pages 1 to 4 of your agenda. Any errors and omissions? Councillor Mott, you had a question?
Please, Chair, thank you. I've a question, please, with regard to the it's bottom of page 1, beginning of page 2, regarding application number 1055/19/full. My understanding was that the minutes would show the conditions that were relevant to that application if it was given conditional approval.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to respond to that one? Mr. Weimer? Or Mrs. Hall, as to whether the minutes would normally include the conditions?
I can double check that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So are you happy, Councillor Mott, for the minutes to be approved on the basis that it's an accurate record, and then if the conditions would normally be included, for them to be added?
Yes, please, Chair. My understanding was that the conditions were going to be listed due to a misunderstanding on a previous application from before, and that for clarity they were going to be included in future.
Okie dokie. Whether that was on the minutes or on the officer's report. Mr. Weimer.
I'm quite happy if we do start putting conditions in the minutes, and happily continue that. I wasn't aware that that was what we were doing as a matter of course at this moment in time, but it may well be because it's a meeting I missed through illness.
Okay, thank you. So aside from that, is everybody happy? Any errors and omissions on any of the other pages? And if not, is everybody happy that I sign them as an accurate record?
Happy.
Lovely, thank you. Taking them in the absence of anything alternative, that we're all happy for that to continue. Obviously, I'll need to sign them as and when we can find a time to do that. Okay. So we're now on item 5, which is a planning application. So this is application number 149920 FUL at Foxcombe Farm, Lewdown, Oakhampton. Mr. Gibbons, over to you, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Just one update for you this morning, following the publication of the report. There's just some further clarification regarding the reasons why this application was called to committee. I discussed the application with Councillor Southcott, and he confirmed that he feels that the economy is a very important consideration at the moment, and more weight should be given to policy TTB2, which supports the growth and expansion of rural businesses and enterprise, and Part 4, which also identifies that the development and diversification of agriculture and other land use businesses should be supported. So it's just clarifying and updating the reasons why this application has been called to the Development Management Committee. Moving on to the application before us, I've got some pictures here of the site. I've got some maps of the context, and I've also got some more policy considerations in terms of the access to cycle links and the connectivity to public transport. So if I begin by looking at the application site, the slide on your screens now shows the site. It's known as Foxcombe Farm, It's a farm-based to the south, to the west of Bridestow and to the east of Loudown, and there'll be some photos in a minute to show you that. This is an aerial photo of the site. You can see there's a collection of farm buildings and a farmhouse around where my cursor is now, and the application site is within the curtilage of the farmhouse building. This is a map showing the context taken from Google Maps. In the top corner there, to the west of the site, northwest of the site, you've got Bridestow, and then to the south west there you've got the Lob Hill Cross, which then goes on to Loudown. So that's just to give you some context really of where the site is. West Devon Drive is the main road there, going through roughly through the middle of the screen, to give you some context. The application is for planning permission to retain this building here as a building for tourist accommodation. So it's been constructed. There's a self-contained unit of accommodation within that, and the proposal is to retain that to be used as tourist accommodation for people visiting West Devon as tourist accommodation. Here's a photo from the rear, so you can see it's a timber-clad building. It's got the form and appearance of an outbuilding that would be associated with a garden building or something similar, really. This is the red line boundary with the area of parking, which will be reserved for the occupants of the unit. And then the building here is the farm building, the house building. And here are the elevations. You can see it is all self-contained. You've got a sleeping area, a small kitchen area, and a living area there, with a bathroom there at the far end. So that was the proposal in front of you. These slides here now pick up on the issues around sustainability and its connectivity to the site. The site is not particularly well served by public transport, owing to the fact that it's located off of West Devon Drive, which is the main spinal route for public transport in this part of the borough. The service here that you've got is the 6A, and this provides 4 services on the link between Bude and Oakhampton a day, and that's in each direction. So it is fairly limited. It's also worth noting that the site isn't particularly that accessible from the bus stop, which would be around the Lob Hill Cottage area, the Lob Hill Cross area of the district. There isn't a public footpath along that road, right to the edge of the bus stop. It's quite a fast road. It's not particularly well lit, and people that would use that bus for that limited service would be required to access that by foot. Moving on to the cycle links, the black cross on this image is roughly where the site is located, and then you can see this is taken from the National Cycle Network. The main national cycle links within the area are the 27, which is identified on that map in the orange colour. It's approximately 8 kilometres from that link, again, which would be poorly served by cycle links. Turning to the footpath links, I'll just bring up my report. These distances are referenced in the report, but the cycle links, the footpath links to Bridestow are fairly limited, and it's located approximately 1 kilometre to the east of Bridestow on the 2B footpath. So it's not really well served in terms of public transport, cycle, or bus connectivity, public transport connectivity. So as a result, there is an identified conflict with the proposal because the policy of the joint local plan identifies that new tourist development should have a good level of access to sustainable modes of transport. This hasn't got a good level of access and will therefore be reliant on the private car. Therefore, the recommendation is for planning permission to be refused on the basis that this is an unsustainable rural location with restricted access to amenities and be reliant on a private car. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies SPT1, SPT2, TTV1, TTV2, and DEV 15 and DEV 29 of the Joint Local Plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will open up for members for questions, but before I do, please could I remind members not to use the chat box to put comments in. It's equivalent to you shouting out partway through the meeting, which you wouldn't normally do. So please could I ask you to refrain? Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions from any members? Councillor Renders and Councillor Hipsey. Thank you.
Sorry, is it currently being used as a holiday let?
It's a retrospective application, but when I was out on site, it wasn't complete. But that was probably 6 weeks ago now. So at the point when I made the application visit, it wasn't occupied. But it is retrospective, so it could be.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you.
Just to pick on up on that one a little bit more then, Mr. Gibbons, are you saying that there was a building of some sort there prior to this starting to be built out, or is this building being built specifically?
It's my understanding this building is being built specifically for this
Right,
use.
okay. Got Councillor Hipsey, then Councillor Crozier and Councillor Moyes.
Yes, Mr. Gibbons, can you please just explain the relevance, if any, of the term West Devon Way? I'm only vaguely aware of the term being a southerner. I suppose the important thing is, is it designated in any way in the JLP? I can't find it. And does it actually have any relevance in this case?
The West Devon Way is the link that links Lifton through to Oakhampton. It's not identified within the local plan, as far as I'm aware of, as any designated policy considerations. However, it does serve as a linear link towards with the A30, and I think it's known as a more of a sort of tranquil route as opposed to the A30, and it links obviously the settlements right the way along there. But I don't think it's got any formal designation within the local plan.
Thanks. Just to supplement you, I think it is the old A30, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's right, yes.
Thank you very much. And
it is actually named the West Devon Drive because it was the original A30, it was the original route. Councillor Crozier, then Councillor Moyes.
I apologise to my interjection over the speech of Mr. Gibbons.
That's okay.
He did have the cross on Beachcombe Farm, which is over a mile from the property. As you saw in this, the original plan, you can see Foxcombe Farm, and you can also see the West Devon Drive, or whichever it is, which is the old A30, which is a matter of a couple of 100 yards from, or within 300 yards of the farm there. I used to use a through route there at one time, so I know the area fairly intimately. The other question that was brought out in the officer's report, that it was 8 kilometres from the nearest cycle route. The nearest cycle route travels through Lidford, and I don't believe that is 5 miles. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes and Councillor Cheadle.
Yes, I would disagree with Mr. Councillor Crozier. I think the thing was on Beachcombe Cottage, which is probably a mile away from Beachcombe Farm. But anyway, do we have any records of holiday occupancy in West Devon? It has always worried me that we're getting too many holiday cottages, which eventually will take the economy out of quite a few of them.
We don't actually monitor that. I know Devon County Council used to do a visitor survey when they were supporting the structure plan policies, but once that was abolished, the structure plan, I don't think Devon County no longer record records of that, unless Phil Baker's aware of any. He is on this call as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker, are you able to give any further insight on that one?
Yeah, good morning, members. No, is the short answer. It's not something that the joint local plan requires us to monitor. It may be something that we try to factor into the local plan review. Certainly more information around visitor numbers and tourism would give us an additional qualitative aspect to how we apply our policies, but at this point in time, no, we don't have that information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you very much. Yes, just reading the officer's report, it does say that one of the requirements of a planning application such as this is that the applicant shall detail something around the sustainable arrangements that are going to accompany the development. I just wondered if any such proposals had been made associated with this application.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Yes, the applicant has submitted information which demonstrates there is a need for this from a local agent, from a specialist cottage provider, holiday cottage provider, and they've also detailed that they would be prepared to implement electric vehicle charging if it was permitted. So they would seek to minimise the use of carbon through encouraging people with electric vehicles. But of course, I don't think we'd be able to find out, we wouldn't be able to control that to allow just electric vehicles. It would just be a supplementary provision really, as opposed to something we would seek to require through condition.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Gibbons, do you know the outline plan showed that it was a double bedroom with sort of living room area? Do you know how many guests it is proposed to be able to house? Is it just for couples, or is it a sort of a like put you up on the sofa for families as well? Do we know the size of building in terms of how many you would occupy at any given time? What's the better way of putting it?
Yes, there's nothing specific on the application, but looking at it, the floor plan now on your screens, you can see there's a double bed for sleeping, and as you said, perhaps you could accommodate a child or two children in the living area. So you would probably say that's the maximum you could have there is 4 people at one time, but for more comfortable level of accommodation, it would be a couple's.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Radcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. It's a follow-on really from the previous question. I noticed from the plans which were submitted and are on the portal that it is a straight rectangular building which follows the form of the structure which is there at present, but there appeared to be a fairly large, what looked like a veranda at the front, but also a blister at the back, which was including accommodation. It seems that the drawings submitted for us to consider are slightly different from the photographs which the officer put up. And that's a question to the officer.
Yes, I think that's well spotted, Councillor Ratcliffe. I think I don't know. All I've got really is the plans that are on the file. Perhaps during construction there was some amendments to the proposal that were required as a result of on-site constraints, and has resulted in this area to the rear. I don't think it would be material to the planning application in terms of its form and character, but we would require the plans to reflect accurately what is proposed. So it would require the applicants to come in with some amended plans to pick up on that anomaly.
Thank you.
Any more on this one? So I just want to clarify then, possibly Mr. Weimer, what we are looking at, the images that we are looking at isn't the same as the plans that have been uploaded and that are on the portal, I want to clarify exactly what we are going to be making a decision on today, because obviously members of the public who may have wanted to respond, albeit there seem to be fairly minor changes, as to whether this is something that we can now be taking forward, or do we need to wait for amended plans and defer this?
Could I come? Yeah, yeah. Perhaps Pat could pick on first, and I'll come back with a second point, please.
Okay, I think the changes are such that if members were, I think we could I think the application can be determined, because I don't, the small, Oliver, if you could go to the other elevation, please, the photograph. I think that the small element on the back is wouldn't make any significant difference to anybody who has made comments on the application. And if you could go back to the veranda, Oliver, please. And I note that there's some significantly sized doors and windows in that elevation, so I don't think that the provision of the veranda as such would cause any additional harm to neighbouring amenity or potentially the character of the building. So I think the application can be determined as it stands. What if the application was, if members are minded to approve, then I think there's two questions for you. Firstly, are you happy with, because it's a retrospective application, are you happy with the building as being constructed in the photographs? In which case it could be minded to approve subject to revised plans that detail the building as being constructed. If it was, if you went with officer recommendation and it was refused, then what would be refused would be the plans that are in front of us at the moment, but the entirety would be unauthorised. And if we sought enforcement action, then the enforcement action would be to remove the building in its entirety, whether it was on the plan submitted or not. I don't know whether David would like to come in at that point just to correct any inaccuracies I've just made, if any.
Mr. Fairburn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, Chairman. I think Mr. Weimer's accurately summed the position up. I think if you refuse it, then you're refusing it on the basis of what's there, and if everything is there, it's unlawful. But if you are minded to grant planning permission, then it would be sensible to secure an amended plan to show what is actually being constructed. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And we do have the applicant as a registered speaker and opportunities to ask her questions. So that might be a question that we can ask regarding the little bit at the back as to what its purpose is. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Just to muddy the water a little bit, this application is for a retrospective application for holiday use. If that is refused, would this building then come under permitted development as part of their curtilage and part of what they would be allowed to do anyway?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mott. Yes, because without having compared it to the permitted development regulations, I wouldn't be able to give you a firm answer. But as you say, under Class E of the General Permitted Development Order, you can build ancillary outbuildings that are incidental to the purposes of the enjoyment of the dwelling house. So it couldn't be used for that use, but it could be used as a summer house or a home office or something similar. There are restrictions on the sizes, so I wouldn't be able to give you, as I said, I wouldn't be able to give you a firm answer, but it would be something of the nature of a Class E building, provided it met with those limitations. There's things like heights within certain distance of the boundary and ridge heights. But if I was going to, I'd say broadly, it would probably comply with with those limitations of the General Permitted Development Order.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You happy with that, Councillor Mott?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes.
Yes, I'm slightly confused because my understanding was that the farm was not owned by the applicant. So would this make a difference?
Not with regards to permitted development, no, because the permitted development rights go along with the land use. So it's within the curtilage of that farm building, the garden area, the curtilage. So those rights exist with the land, and it's not dependent on the occupier or the owner.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from anybody? No. Okay. In that case, I would like to invite Ms. Spoonser, who is, I believe, the applicant actually. Spoonser, can you just confirm? Can you hear me okay? And we can do a sound check, make sure we can hear you.
I can hear you okay.
Wonderful, and we can hear you too. Okay, as you probably heard right at the start, and I know you've been briefed by the officers, yes. But you do have 3 minutes in which to bring your presentation. You'll get a sort of 30-second warning towards the end, just to let you know that time to start summing up if you're nowhere near the end. Members will have an opportunity to ask you questions. So if people have already asked a question and the answer hasn't been given as yet, you don't necessarily need to put that take that out of your time. You might want to wait until people actually have the opportunity to ask you the question afterwards. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So we will give you 3 minutes, and time will start when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Farming is in my blood. My family have been farming for centuries, and our son is now studying at Duchy College, so it's likely to continue this tradition. However, we're facing challenging times, falling meat prices, increasing costs, and the discontinuance of the basic payment scheme. The future looks decidedly uncertain. If we are to be financially self-sufficient, that is, not reliant on state benefits, or have to pursue off-site employment, we will have to plan carefully. When I initially heard our application was going to be refused, I was so cross. And Councillor Mott, I'm very sorry you took the brunt of this. I just didn't understand. Farmers have always been encouraged to diversify in order to maintain their viability. What has suddenly changed? Why won't the council support our endeavours? Quite simply, the adoption of the joint local plan. Our application, as Oliver said, is for a single high-end two-person self-catering unit sited within our garden. Oliver didn't raise any issues on design, highways, or any other concerns, and we have support from Helpful Holidays. So what's the problem? Being some distance from the village, we're falling foul of those sustainability clauses and all the distances that Oliver Gibbons was talking about. Nevertheless, I feel our case is so similar to the approved development at Lower Ebsworthy Town Farm, Bridgestow, at the beginning of August, that this recommendation seems unfair. Despite the distance from the village and other amenities, their application for 3 units of tourist accommodation has been approved. In simple terms, they failed to satisfy the same raft of SPTs, TTVs and DEVs as us, but specific provision has been made for barn conversions. Nevertheless, there is another paragraph within the joint local plan, and I draw your attention to Dev 15.8 Part 4 that states, and I quote, "If there are unused existing buildings within the site, applicants are required to demonstrate why these cannot be used for the uses proposed before new buildings will be considered." This isn't actually a new building, it is a rather upmarket refurb of a Portakabin. As farmers, yes, we do have redundant barns on our property, but we are not just farmers, we are specifically tenant farmers and have been strongly advised against investing in them. We don't own the barns, our landlord does, and whilst he is in agreement, if we invested in his barns, it's extremely unlikely we would ever see that outlay back. For this reason, I would ask the council to consider our farm tenancy as a justifiable reason for not converting the barns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Any members have any questions for Ms. Spoonser? Just while they're thinking about whether they do, I wonder if I could just ask the question regarding can you see the slides, Ms. Spoonser, that
Yes.
planning officers? Yes. And at the rear of the property, there was that little sort of offshot shoot that.
Yes.
Yes. Are you able to just advise what the purpose of that would be for?
The purpose of that was to it's got the boiler, gas boiler in it.
Okay.
We just didn't feel it was sensible to have that nastiness in such a lovely accommodation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cheadle and then Councillor Pearce.
Oh, thank you. I just got one question about your statement. As you read it out, it appeared to me as if you had put in a planning application and had been given sort of some comfort that it should be all right, and then was surprised at its refusal. But this is being put in front of us as a retrospective application. I just wondered if you could clear that up.
Yeah, we didn't have an application in before. We felt, well, the plan was to put the application in the early spring, and then when our cows were out at Dartmoor to actually do the conversion then. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way. And my husband, who was supposed to have had a part-time job for the summer, then thought, you know, what am I going to do? We looked at what was happening with accommodation, and we felt that actually there's going to be a big need for this as soon as the lockdowns were lifted. People will just want to get away, and you know that's far enough from the house that I would feel safe doing that. So we made the rather rash decision to just crack on and do it. It came as such a shock to find that we weren't going to get this. Yeah, it was a gamble, and it's a gamble that is looking like it's not going to pay off, and we just don't understand why not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. My question, I just have one question. Could you clarify how long you've been a tenant farmer at this holding?
We've been there for 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Any members have any more questions for Ms. Spoonser? If not, thank you very much indeed for your time, Spoonser. You can perhaps go back on mute again, and obviously you're welcome to remain while we continue
okay, thank you.
Looking at your application. Thank you. And I would now like to invite Councillor Southcott, who's the ward member who has called this in, and he is going to be speaking, and you have 5 minutes, Councillor Southcott. When you're ready, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a good bit of what I was going to say has actually just been covered by Mrs. Spoonser. So I'm going to sort of cut short what I was going to say considerably. The main thrust of the reason I brought this in is the disparity between an owner farmer who can do what they like with the buildings and a tenant farmer who is limited to what they can do because of the financial considerations. But when you actually look at the JLP, there is this disparity between the two, and there is a big disadvantage from one to the other when they're doing developments. A lot of research has been done. We've looked at this quite a bit running up to this, and when you look at the farming community out and about, around about a third of the farming community are tenant farmers, and they're all having problems with finances these days. And as Mrs. Spoonser said, the basic payment scheme is due to disappear shortly. We're not sure quite what is going to replace it. Therefore, farms are going to be in a lot more financial difficulty. Holidays is a prime thing around this area. The West Devon Way, which was referred to earlier, is designed as a tourist route, although it's used a lot of other things, but mainly a tourist route through West Devon. It is used by a lot by cyclists, a lot by walkers, and all kinds of organisations actually run events on it, believe it or not. I'm a little bit thrown this morning as this has not gone quite as I planned. And I think really at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that we as a council need to support farming and rural enterprises. The way the JLP is written, there is a big block on development in the countryside now. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it seems to be restrictive, too restrictive in this. And maybe the last thing it sort of ought to be considered is whether we're treating all the people in the countryside fairly. All public bodies must think about treating people with different groups fairly and equally. And this is part of the Equalities Act. Although that really looks at all kinds of ethnic things, it can also be looked at as being rural versus town, whatever you like. It's equality. And I think we are slipping up somewhere here, and we're not supporting local enterprise and farming in the rural community. And I think I'm going to leave it at that at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions for Councillor Southcott? I just have one question for you, Councillor Southcott, and I might need to go to the officer as well, but I was a little bit puzzled that from your statement that owners are treated differently to tenants in this particular application. I'm just very quickly trying to glance through the report and listen to you at the same time, but I'm just wondering where you've got the evidence from regarding this particular application, that it is being turned down on the basis that the applicant is a tenant. My understanding is it is due to the sustainability issue, and I will come to the officer on that one. But I just wondered if you were able to advise why you were of the view it was because they were a tenant.
Well, that primarily, when you look at the JLP, let me find a specific bit here a minute. If there is any unused existing buildings within the site, applicants are required to demonstrate why these cannot be used for the proposed purpose before a new building will be considered. Well, yeah, if you own the land, you own the buildings, you can do more or less what you want with them within confines of planning. A tenant can't do that. And that's where the disparity comes in, and that's where I think there's disadvantage between tenants and owners. Does that clear it?
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Any other questions for Councillor Southcott? It would appear not. So thank you very much, Councillor Southcott, for your time.
Thank you.
Any other members, any questions for the planning officer? Well, I'm not sure if this is Mr. Gibbons or Mr. Weimer really, but I think we need to pick up a little bit more on what Councillor Southcott has stated, because clearly this is relating to a policy issue, and with planning decisions we need to relate specifically to policy. So it is regarding whether there is anything within this particular application and the recommendation within it that is actually designed, being treated, the applicant is being treated differently as a tenant, as an owner. Mr. Baker, I think, are you happy to take this one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I understand the points raised. I mean, it should be pointed out that regardless of who owns the actual property or the buildings within, the application of the joint local plan policies would remain the same. The proposal site would be considered in the same way and described in the same way. The spatial strategy contained within the joint local plan and the declaration of climate emergency are entirely accordant, and I think the result of applying these two elements in tandem is that you do get consistent outcomes that recognise the spatial strategy with joint local plan, the settlement hierarchy that we've got, and the sustainable pattern of development that we are seeking to achieve. Some of the issues that have been mentioned are actually dealt very comfortably and consistently with a relatively recent appeal decision, which is land at Tool Down, which is near Milton Abbot. Again, this was an application for a shepherd's hut to be used for tourism accommodation, and the inspector was quite clear there that the application of the joint local plan policies didn't preclude rural diversification per se. It was very encouraging if the circumstances were correct, but the spatial consideration of the proposal site was key. And whilst there might be some limited benefit from an economic and tourism point of view from a single tourism accommodation unit, it still needs to accord strongly with the spatial strategy of the plan. The relevance of that appeal decision and the similarities in terms of circumstance, I think, are particularly pertinent in this regard, and I'm quite comfortable with the officer recommendation in terms of how that aligns with that appeal decision and with the adopted strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier, did you have a question?
Sorry, I was on mute. Under the officer's report, relevant planning history, they've listed 4 applications which were turned down by inspectors, not including the one that was just alluded to. Now, I've tried to look these up and haven't been able to, but the only one I know of is the one at Lip Hill Quay, which was in a particularly sensitive site on the Tamar, within the AONB. Now, the question I've got is that there is a disparity in policy on this one. I took it up with Tom Jones in November last year, and he agreed with me that the policy as we have it now precludes development outside any centre. And this is against the other alluded to considerations under Human Rights Act 1998 and Equalities Act of 2010. And I would like to ask whether these have really been considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbons.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Crozier. Yes, the planning history is identified on the report. I'm afraid, yes, I think I could have been more clear on the application numbers, but you can review them through the portal, through the postcode searches. I think Phil will be able to help me out with the question on the policies and the Human Rights Act, but it's my understanding that the plan was subject to a environmental impact assessment, which would have looked at these types of issues. I mean, sustainability does go to the heart of the plan and the plan making process and the MPPF, because we're trying to preserve minimise the impact on the environment from new development, ensuring that the new development that does come forward makes the opportunities to improve social cohesion through being accessible to a wider section of people through public transport, and it also looks at the economic side as well by focusing developments in settlements where there are maximised benefits for services, so that people can use and support jobs and employment within those settlement hierarchies. So yes, there is an acknowledgement that the plan is about sustainability, but that's the focus of the plan, and is in accordance with national policy.
Mr. Baker, did you want to come in as well? Or Mr. Fairbairn, I don't mind which.
I mean, I'll start to take it up if I may. I mean, as has been said, the plans were taken through various impact assessments, but in terms of the Equality Act, there are no Equality Act issues here. The discrimination, if there is any discrimination between tenancy and owners, is not a protected characteristic, so that would be irrelevant. And in terms of the Human Rights Act, if the application is determined in accordance with the local plan, then there is no interference with any human rights. There is effectively no right to develop. That was a right taken away by the first Planning Acts, or certainly the 1947 Act. So I think the issue they are not necessarily considerations which arise as a result of the distinction between a tenant and an owner. And I think the other thing which I need to think about, but effectively, I think the argument that's being put forward is that as a tenant, if you carry out improvements to property that is effectively ultimately going to revert to the landlord at the end, then you don't reap the benefits. Normally, under landlord and tenant law, there is a right to compensation to reflect the fact that you have carried out an improvement to the landlord's building. So ultimately, they're not matters that are material considerations for your determination today. At the moment, the determination you've got to make is entirely based on the matters that are set out in the plan. This distinction between owner and occupier is a bit of a red herring, I'm afraid. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fairburn. Any other further questions?
Can I make a part of the National Farmers Union and of tenancy affairs? The compensation that Mr. Fairburn talks about is only if the landlord agrees. The landlords, and CLA in particular, are very cagey about giving any compensation for any tenants' improvements to farms. In fact, the old regime was 10 years and £1. That is a lot of compensation. So that still persists a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crozier. I think one of the key things that Mr. Fairburn was actually raising at this was actually it's not a material planning consideration. Whether it's fair or not is a different story, but it wouldn't be a material planning consideration for us today when we're looking at this application. I'm sure Mr. Fairburn will put me right if I've got that one wrong.
You're absolutely right, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so any other further questions? If not, then to move this into debate, I will move the recommendation as laid out on page 6 of your agenda. And the recommendation is for, is it 6 or page 6 or page 5? It is page 6, just double checking. And the recommendation is for refusal. Is there, do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Terry Pearce, I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, we are in debate. If anybody wishes to speak, please indicate in the chat box. I'll give you a few seconds. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Chair. These applications always, I find always tricky ones to deal with, because it's always comes down to a balance between the constraints within the JLP on sustainability of development and the need for supporting the rural economy, and this sort of falls in between the two of those. As Mr. Gibbons suggested, this building, if it wasn't used for accommodation, might be used for something else under permitted development rights. So it's sort of not the building, perhaps, that goes through my mind, the sort of thing that we're considering. It's the use of the building. And elsewhere, farmsteads are encouraged to diversify to help support their income by converting barns and the like, as we've heard. So for me, it comes down to whether we choose to support the rural economy in this way, or whether we abide rigorously to the constraints of the JLP on sustainable, particularly transport. And most farm accommodation buildings, in my experience, are usually quite a long way from regular transport facilities. In fact, that is one of the attractions of them, that you're out in the middle of nowhere. So I toss those thoughts up in the air, and on this occasion I come down on the side of supporting the rural economy, and that's the way I shall vote.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Moyes.
Yes, whatever we think about the JLP, we can't do anything about changing it until it's looked at again. Where the building is concerned, I'm a bit surprised that, you've got a lovely looking wooden building and what looks like either corrugated iron or asbestos as a roof. Also, there are steep hills to and from this accommodation, which you'd have to be fairly fit to go up and down those to any transport issues.
Thank you. Councillor Renders.
Yes, thank you. It's funny because this application brought back quite a few happy memories for me. In a previous life, and I could have looked at the aerial photograph of this and seen somewhere where I used to live, and understand fully the applicant's desire to make use of the building there for this particular purpose. I think my thoughts are that the COVID situation has changed. One of the biggest points that the officers made on here for refusal is sustainability. And I do think, and we only have to look out the window at the minute to see the amount of people that are no longer going abroad. And I think that is going to be for the near future, that properties like this will be desirable and will produce an income. I agree entirely with what Councillor Cheadle said, because I'd written it on here. He actually said what I'd written, that I don't think that the fact that there isn't public transport nearby is of any concern. As I say, when we had ours, people wanted to just get away, and we were even more remote than this. And it did prove to be lucrative when we'd had the farmer tax, and as the subsidies dropped off, we were looking for other incomes, and I do think it's a revenue stream, and I don't agree entirely that it isn't sustainable. I think it's changing, and I think, for the next foreseeable future, people aren't wanting to go abroad as much, and I think that there is an opportunity here, and with Councillor Cheadle on this, and support come down in favour of the economy over and above the decision of the officer on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's pretty poor when we can't support such small-scale rural developments that help with our local economy and support local businesses and innovation, and especially the farmers. I think tourism is the major industry in Devon, yet here we are putting blocks and hurdles in the way of small and beneficial initiatives, and at the same time we're building swathes of unnecessary housing on green spaces with scant regard to community needs or infrastructure. And it seems that this and successive governments have subscribed to the Keynesian economic principles of buying our way out of the recession. We've been doing this for over 10 years. I have no objection to the theory, but I do have issue with the projects the government have chosen, in particular, building, house building, HS2, etc. They're incredibly destructive to the countryside environment, as well as the communities they affect. Now, the cost of these projects, particularly HS2, have escalated, and there's been little regard to future use or economic development in the areas they're supposed to support. It's a shame projects such as those involving environmental issues and combating global warming, which are really needed, have not been considered. Yet small-scale developments like this one we are debating are rejected, mainly as a result of current criteria of the JPL and planning directives. At this rate, we're going to end up with our tourism facilities concentrated in built-up areas, towns, cities and villages. And we should be looking at schemes like other countries have to support their local tourism. You know, French Gîtes, for example, they're all rural areas and they're supporting their local farmers. And tourism is necessary for the sustainability of our communities, and this should be reflected in the next redrafting of the JPL. Now, I have to support the officer recommendation, but I urge that we revisit the JPL at the earliest opportunity and reassess that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vachon. Mr. Weimer has just asked to come in. I know I have two others waiting to speak. Mr. Weimer has just asked to come in, so Mr. Weimer.
Councillor, I'll happily come in after the other members have spoken.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Pearce and Councillor Hipsey.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very difficult application, and you know there are a number of issues that have been raised here by members and also by the applicant. I have concerns the applicant referred to the grant of application at Bridgestow.
I'm terribly sorry, Councillor Pearce. Madam Chair, can I ask if we could pause just to allow Councillor Renders to rejoin?
Okay, thank you. If we can just everybody can just go on mute a moment.
I'm here. I'm still here.
No, he's back. Lovely. Thank you.
He's back.
I didn't go anywhere. I didn't go anywhere at all. I've been listening intently. Is it showing that I'm not here? I have had a problem. Let me just hang on 2 seconds. What's it showing?
Was only a couple of seconds you appeared you went offline and you haven't missed anything, Councillor Renders.
In that case, I wasn't aware that I had because I didn't seem to. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Pearce.
Councillor Pearce, if you'd like to just start your bit again, just to make sure that Councillor Renders didn't miss anything. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very difficult application, it really is, and you know I take on board the concerns that members so far who've spoken have raised. There were comments from the applicant about the application that was approved at Bridgestow, but you know it was a totally different application to this one, and it's like chalk and cheese because this building has been constructed for the tourism industry. My feeling is that if a holding is struggling financially, the landlord should be assisting the tenant and allowing the existing barns to be converted with his financial or their financial help, rather than relying on the tenant to come up with ideas to make the holding financially viable. And this is where we have a great difficulty, and it's happening with a lot. But I think it's down to landlords to assist the tenant, the farmers, to make the holding continue to be viable. We need to be very careful here because this is quite an isolated location. Public transport is quite a way away, and we only a few months ago went through our carbon emergency agenda, and we all agreed to reduce the use of the private motor vehicle. And yet here we are possibly looking to approve something which is, although it's only small scale, it will need the private motor vehicle to be used for access. And to me, that seems to be quite hypocritical, that while it's a lovely spot and it's in great to go for a holiday there, we have to look at what we're bringing forward in the future with our green policies. And we're going against so many of our policies. I know the JLP is not ideal, but unfortunately these things are put in place, and although it will be reviewed, and that review is starting very shortly, we have to take into account what's before us now and what the policies are now. And if we go against the officer's recommendation here, it will be driving a coach and horses through our policies, which are legal documents, and also the fact that we've agreed to reduce the use of the private motor car. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation, and I think members need to think very carefully about this when they come to vote. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. My apologies, my dog is barking in the background. There's somebody outside. I can't keep her quiet. And I have Councillor Hipsey, followed by Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I really do agree with the last 5 speakers. This is a really difficult one. I wasn't expecting it to be quite as difficult to decide as it is. It definitely is. It sets the rural economy against the provisions of the JLP, and I think in this case the JLP has been kind of slightly wrong-footed by the whole COVID crisis, which clearly couldn't have been foreseen. But it is in place. It is the rule. It does lay down the rules, and as Councillor Pearce said, we also have to consider our requirements or our resolution to reduce carbon emissions, and looking at the location of this particular application, this development, it really can't be described as sustainable. It's such a long way off the road, and the bus services are not brilliant. I'm still struggling with this one, but at the moment I feel that my hands are being tied by the JLP, and if it comes down to that, when the JLP does come up for renewal and debate, I think we really ought to be thinking about applications like this and how they are affected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hipsey. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Southcott and I share the ward that this application sits in, and we did have quite a long or several long and in-depth conversations about this application, and I fully support his reasons for calling it forward to committee, because I do feel that this does need looking at within the JLP, but that's a conversation for the JLP and for further review. That said, it's really difficult when you do have applications like was mentioned up at Bridestow, which come under the Class Q applications, which therefore are more likely to have support for their application, when the reality is it is for 3 holiday accommodations with exactly the same circumstances as this. The only difference is they are converting barns as opposed to be putting up a new cabin. I fully support their reasons for putting this application in. I fully support Councillor Southcott's reasons for calling this to committee. However, as has been mentioned, I will have to go with the officer recommendation because that's what the JLP currently states. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's very, very clear that there is tensions between the JLP in terms of sustainability and also supporting the rural economy. And yes, I think this is certainly something that needs to be looked at when the JLP comes up for review, as to how practically this can be outworked, irrespective of what the outcome actually of today is. From the council's perspective, it has certainly highlighted some issues that we hadn't sort of overcome or hadn't been taken into account before, which I realise that's going to be a small comfort to the applicant in the event that this is refused today, and equally it could be approved. We don't know, it hasn't gone to the vote yet. But Mr. Weimer, I think, wanted to come in a moment.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief because Councillors Pearson and Mott have said much of what I was going to. I think I would counsel caution to members about effectively changing policy on the hoof when we're looking at individual applications, because it causes issues around consistency. When we look at the appeals listing after this item, there's a relatively similar application at Chorldown where the appeal was dismissed. And I think the comments that have just come out, I think, are absolutely right. There's clearly a tension between members' views around the rural economy and the policy of your joint local plan that was relatively recently adopted. And I think that the way to deal with any tensions that come out of adopted policy is to seek review to look at whether that policy is still appropriate going forward, whether that needs to be revised, and I think that's the appropriate way to deal with it, rather than on an ad hoc application by application basis, because the application of policy should be consistent, because that's the fairest way to deal with applications and applicants across the borough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any further comment that they wish to make? Okay. Right, thank you. In which case, then I'm now going to take this to the vote. So what we have before us is actually a recommendation for refusal, and Mrs. Hall will ask each councillor in turn to confirm you are present for the entire item, and we'll take the vote. So if you vote for, you're voting in support of refusal. If you vote against, then you're going against the refusal. Okay, over to you, Mrs. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cheadle.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hipsey.
I've been present throughout the presentation, the meeting, and reluctantly I vote for.
Councillor Mott.
For.
Councillor Moyes.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
I have been present throughout the presentation and the meeting, and I vote for.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, I was in attendance for the duration of the meeting, and I support the officer's recommendations for refusal.
Councillor Renders. Councillor Renders. Councillor Renders.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Have you been present and heard?
Yes, I've been present all the way through. I pressed the mute button twice. Apologies. I'm going to vote against this.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon.
Yes, present throughout, and I vote for.
Thank you. And Councillor Yelland.
Present throughout, and I vote for.
Thank you. So that's 7 in support of the officer and 3 against. So it's carried as refused. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So yes, that is a refusal, and thank you very much, members, for your time on that one, and to Mrs. Spoonser or Ms. Spoonser as well for your attendance. And actually, this has been a very interesting debate, because it has highlighted some policy issues that perhaps need to be reviewed or certainly looked at in some detail. Thank you very much. So before everybody runs for the hills, we still have item 6, which is the planning appeals update on pages 11 to 12 of your agenda. Mr. Weimer.
Chair, may I just ask, it appears that we may have lost Councillor Renders again.
Ah, right.
Just give him a couple of seconds to see if he reappears or lets me know that he's back.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, now he's gone back to red.
I didn't drop off. I wasn't aware that I'd fallen off. So
we'll have a look at the issue after the committees. If that's
okay, no worries.
Okay,
okay,
thank you.
Fine.
Mr. Weimer.
Thank you. I'll very quickly go through the list of appeal decisions. And happily take any questions at the end. The first 2, whilst they were shown as partially upheld, that members will recall doing a site visit at Morwelland for these 2, and the inspector effectively agreed with the council in that the garage or garages at the back were approved, but the 2 sewer extensions were not approved. Inspectors have the ability to issue split decisions, whereas the council can't. Moving down to the one at Buckingham Monacorum, the outline application for 5 detached dwellings. Good decision by the inspector, in my view. As soon as I got to the paragraph where the inspector said the proposal markedly erodes the unspoilt green open qualities of the site, I didn't really need to go much further before guessing what the decision would be. So it was impact on the area, and also felt that there was a less than substantial impact on the listed Cuxton farmhouse, but that whilst that impact was less than substantial, it wasn't outweighed by the public benefit of the application. So that was formed a second strand for dismissing the application. The Chillerton one, I'm in many ways I'm struggling with, and it seems to go against a lot of other appeal decisions, because the inspector considered that it was in conflict of SPT2 and SPT1, and therefore was contrary to the joint local plan, but it was okay for it to go from a holiday unit to a permanent dwelling because it was already there as a dwelling, albeit a holiday unit, which, as I say, goes against quite a lot of other appeal decisions we've had. So I'm a little bit confused by that one in many ways. The Shepherd Hut for holiday use at Milton Abbot was dismissed, and whilst the inspector accepted that there were limited benefits for the tourism, they didn't outweigh the harm of an unsustainable location, and very similar to the application we've just considered. Lifton Down, a tight site, it was cramped, it would erode the qualities of the amenity of the street scene was the fundamental issue. And finally, a non-determination appeal for Tavistock at 22 Glanville Road was dismissed on the basis that there'd be minor harm to the conservation area and the World Heritage Site, but that minor harm would not be outweighed by the public benefit of a single dwelling. Happily take any questions, Chairman.
There are a couple of others that are on my list. One which is Lamerton, 3404-19 OPA, which came between Milton Abbot and Lifton Down. And then there's one at, oh no, that's just an appeal lodge. But there was the Lamerton one.
Apologies, I must be looking at an older list. I haven't got that on.
There was an updated list. There was an updated list that was sent out. It was,
Apologies, I've missed it. Can we put that on the list for next? I haven't gone through it in any detail. Can we? No, okay. Can I put that back on the list for the next committee?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the 5 dwellings and access road at Lamerton, so I think it'll certainly.
Oh, that right. Is that the Oliver? Are you still on the line?
Yeah, yes.
Presumably, because that was one of yours, wasn't it? You can probably go through that relatively.
Yes, yeah,
quickly.
I can go quickly. Yeah, no problem. Yes, it was appeal dismissed. It was following another application we had previously on the same site for more dwellings, and it was reducing the numbers to 5. But the inspector agreed that it would conflict with the green setting and the landscape character of Lamerton, so it was a good result in that regard. Because of the conflict with the landscape and the impacts it would have on the setting of the village and the character and appearance of the area.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any questions for Mr. Weimer? It would appear not. So in which case, I think we can wrap the meeting up and close the meeting at 10:58. So to close the recording, and thank you all members and officers